In February of 2018, I took a little trip from LA up to the Sacramento area to visit with a good friend of mine, Patrick Dolby. He'd been talking to me about something he was working on called the Energy Sovereignty Project. Curiosity led to excitement, and that in turn led to a casual, impromptu Q&A, which I'll present to you now. Getting into the Energy Sovereignty Program.
Okay.
Or for how long you wanted to do it and why you wanted to do it.
Boy, that's an interesting question. So I would have to say that I didn't even think it was possible in the 90s. I didn't think it was I probably didn't think it was possible in the early 2000s. If you had conversations with me about any of this certainly in the 1990s, I would have laughed at you. And at that point, I knew I was aware of everything that was going on with solar and batteries at the time because it was supremely interesting to me. And I had thought in a science fiction way that it will be eventually really interesting when something happens. And we had lithium-ion batteries back in the 90s, and I knew that was going to be the driver, at least short term, right? Until obviously all of this is, standing on the shoulders of giants. You build these things. But I saw the lithium-ion battery for what it was. And it was amazing, and they were incredibly expensive even then, powering mostly laptops. And there was this simultaneous battle in computer technology where they were trying to make the batteries more energy dense, and they were trying to make the computers use less power. And the two combined would then make the computer be able to last longer. In the 90s, 2-3 hours on a laptop was amazing. And then it became 4 hours and 6 hours. 8 hours was common then, in the early 2000s. And so it's difficult to say at what point things changed to the point where I went, but I'm going to say it was probably sometime around 2010 or so when, like anything else, it's a materials game, right? You figure out, how to clean up your materials, how to modify and select your materials so they don't degrade on you as fast. Or you learn how to protect those materials in a way that makes them longer lived. And so around 2008, 2010, they really started to package the solar panels well in a way that extended their longevity from 4 or 5 years into the 10, 15, 20-year range that you really are looking for if you're going to put something on your roof. Right?
So at this point, solar panels had been around for how long?
So all through the, they the photovoltaic cells. I remember playing with those things in the early 70s.
Oh wow, okay.
Oh yeah. And again, it was a wafer that was coated and had lines of solder on the top of it, and it was great for maybe spinning a propeller or something, and it was cute, it was quaint, it introduced kids to the idea that you could actually turn sunlight into electricity, which was incredible on its face, right? And so the issue there is that the materials are exposed to the air, and then they degrade, right? And so then it became a case of, well, how do you package these? Well, encapsulating it is not as easy as it sounds, and it doesn't actually stop it from deteriorating. So, basically the materials then have to change. The encapsulation has to change. You have to refine all these things. And all through the 90s, there was it was a struggle. There were people that were trying to figure out how to do that. And now it's just one of those things where we just assume it, it'd always been that way. And given the given the history of the solar cell and as it advanced, it was one of those things where around 2010 I started, I think, to realize, wow, okay, we're getting close. The lithium-ion batteries had gotten to the point where we were seeing some serious capacities on it. The 18650 cell was a very common cell. I had a lot of things that's charging the pad right now. And then all of a sudden, here comes this guy who's going to make a car using thousands of laptop battery cells, right? These 18650 cells. And the weight exchange between doing that and comparing it to a car with a motor, if you include the cooling system and all of that, was pretty close to a wash. And then when you include the efficiencies of the electric motor, then that kind of pushed it over the edge. Well, solar in and of itself, I'm not going to say it's useless, but it really does, the applications are incredibly limited until you run it through some kind of a storage device. Now, if your storage device is lead acid, there's no way that as an engineer I'm going to, in any way, shape, or form, promote or think that it's a viable thing to have 90 kilowatts of lead acid batteries in every house. No. That's not my idea of the future. But lithium-ion batteries? Right? He's packed 90 kilowatts of power into a flat sled that sits in the bottom of this skateboard of the car. All right, that got my attention. All right? And so I would say it was at that point that I then wanted to see proof that this was all going to stick around for a little bit.
Who was he, by the way?
Elon Musk.
Oh, so this was
Elon
Musk.
the Roadster, or not the Roadster, but the his design for the Model S.
Okay, cool.
Right,
so that was happening around this time.
Yeah. Around 2010, he started announcing that this is what he was going to do. I think it was 2011. He started showing his prototype. 2012, I think, was when if I remember correctly, was when the first Model S was rolled out. That, I suppose, was kind of that trigger moment, that when I was able to put together the solar power with an actual viable energy storage device that I, as an engineer, could get behind, as far as, oh, this is something I can actually see in everybody's garage, right? And when it degrades, you remove it and you're able to recycle 90% plus of the entire thing. Lithium, the cobalt, the aluminum casing, everything you can get back, and then and that's not even including repurposing, because when one of these battery cells goes bad, because it's composed of many individual cells, not all of those individual cells are bad. Many of those individual cells are still good. So there's even the possibility of knocking those out, using them for something else, and repurposing the battery before you resort to recycling the battery. And so again, I think at that point it's like, oh, here we go. Now it's game on. But I was busy, right? I mean, I'm busy turning $1 million a year company into $1 billion a year company, and so I'm head down running, baby. I'm not, So if you're talking about the energy sovereignty project,
at that point,
as what you're seeing come out now, I couldn't have possibly been ready for that, because, I had it in my head that was, something that I'd like to do. But,
so at that point, you're working as a
with
process
Invisalign,
engineer.
as a process engineer for Invisalign, and myself and a handful of other engineers are busy designing their manufacturing process, the one that they're using to this day. So then, as things progress, and we, we get the company to where we feel that that needs to be expansion and all of that. Things are not as hectic, all right? And then of course they get completely unhectic when the company decides that they're that basically they've come as far as they want to, and so then they disbanded our engineering group, which freed up all of my time. So. At a basic level, it harkens back to that time when you have some property that you happen to have a creek that runs through it. And so then by diverting the water in the creek, you turn a water wheel, and then all of a sudden you're a miller. Right? If you got a lot of water, now not only are you a miller, but now you can run a trip hammer for a smithy. You can make a boat lock to raise boats up to different levels, and all of this because you happen to have that energy on your land. You're in control of that energy. If you are a farmer, you buy 2 horses with the idea that they're going to make more horses. And so then all of a sudden, you're not in the horse business, you're in the farming business, but you have horsepower, and now you are able to plow your own field because you have energy sovereignty. You're able to saddle up that horse and ride it from town to town to get a better grain price. Right? That's energy sovereignty. And so the Energy Sovereignty Project, it simply is an attempt to return us to that point in time where you don't require this enormous nuclear power plant and a oil tanker from Saudi Arabia and a refinery in Alameda or in Benicia, right? So that you can go to work. So that's energy sovereignty, is the idea that you can, for a good deal of the year, depending on your latitude and elevation, where are you on the planet, right? You can generate through sunlight enough power to allow you to at least operate on some level with sunlight and lithium and some cobalt. All right, that's amazing to me. And so then the Energy Sovereignty Project is an attempt to do what I do as a process engineer and quantify that. All right, how much sovereignty can we have? All right, by doing this, and I don't know, but I want to find out, and I'm willing to invest some money into finding out. How much money, I don't know. That's why we're kind of doing the project, right? I'd really like to see if I can get some buy-in from other folks to help out, and then what the project will do is it will put a public face on it, and then allow people to see the test done in an actual house with an actual car, showing an actual power bill, right? What could I get for this? What's my investment? What do I need? And the companies that are providing this, they're doing mostly guesswork. Pretty good guesses, and the guesses keep getting better. Now, I looked at Tesla's website early on when they were offering their Powerwall 1, right? And my first thought, honest to God, when I saw that was, hire me! Hire me please, because you need somebody to run proper numbers. Because they're wrong. And it's one of those things where you just want to reach into the screen and strangle somebody, but there's nobody to strangle, right? And then you get this smile when 6, 8 months, 9 months, a year later, and the numbers that they keep looking more and more real world, and you're like, oh, they hired me, they hired a me. somebody like me went in there and said, no! And now when you go on their site and you look at at the numbers that they have, they're pretty close. They're pretty close. I couldn't, I don't know that I could have promised any better. And the reason for that is they're doing the testing. They're doing the testing. They're smart guys. They're sending freaking launched Elon's car. They're doing good. So he's got access to the right people, and so now we just need to help them a little bit. We need to actually do the install, actually run it, tell them and the consumers, hey, this is how much power generation you need on your roof. This is how much power generation you need at the house. And if you do that, then this is the result. The farm got big enough that the horses just weren't going to cut it. And so when they were presented with an alternative, especially the large farms, then turned to mechanization to really crank. And so they did sacrifice their sovereignty in that now they had to, at least to some degree, tie the amount that they charged for flour with the amount that they paid for diesel. All right? And that same thing was true for the trucking industry and whatever. But it's a little tricky because if you didn't have your own farm and you were delivering ice in San Francisco with a horse-drawn cart, you still had to pay somebody for hay and alfalfa. So that isn't necessarily all that different from paying somebody for petrol. But it is a whole lot different than paying somebody for sunlight. When you examine things from an engineering perspective to try and tease out viability, engineers work in extremes. What you do is you examine the extremes on one end, and you examine the extremes on the other end, and then you find out where that hybrid solution is created. And it's almost, I would have said always a hybrid solution if we had this conversation a decade and a half ago, where there's never going to be one aspect or the other to your solution. It's never going to be black or white. It's always going to be some shade of gray in the middle. And then that's where you tune your optimization. Is it closer to one and is it closer to the other? Is it really truly right in the middle? So when you look at something like power generation, on one end, you have to pay for everything up front. You have to pay for the mode of generation. You have to pay for the mode of transmission, the lines to get it to you. You have to pay for the people to maintain that equipment. You have to pay for everything. That's on one extreme, right? And on the other extreme is it's free. The energy comes out of a unicorn's ass, right? So now, obviously, the engineering solution to that would be it's a hybrid solution. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. You deal with a public utility, the cost is shared, and there you go. And then it's a solution. And that's a solution that we used for 100 years. Until the solar panel and the lithium-ion battery allowed us to pull power out of a unicorn's ass. Right?
Yeah.
Sunlight, for God's sakes. Sunlight! And a battery. Now, granted, in winter, you've got a problem, especially if you live north where it snows or at a high elevation where it snows. You have a problem, and in winter you're probably not going to be able to do it. But you also then have other solutions. You have wind. You have hydroelectric. There are other solutions. Norway is running on hydroelectric for the most part. They actually carved hydroelectric reservoirs into the mountains and everything. So there are solutions. It's not. I'm not just going to sit here and say it's all free, and it also isn't free because you obviously your own personal infrastructure it's costly, and you're comparing that cost to an annual cost of this co-op, right? And so I'm not saying that all of a sudden everybody's going to wind up going off grid and everything's fine and I have a unicorn petting zoo in my front yard. That's not what I'm saying. It is still a hybrid solution, but it's a hybrid solution that is so far canted to getting power out of a unicorn's ass that it's not even funny. And so now with the Energy Sovereignty Project, we want to find out how far that realistically goes at this latitude, and that's what we're going to do. So it'll be interesting. We want to keep it real world. We're not advocating. Also, the Energy Sovereignty Project does not advocate separating yourself from the grid. Not at all. We don't feel that is something that is socially responsible. It's not socially responsible to disconnect yourself from the grid. Sorry, it's just not. It's socially responsible to make yourself a part of the energy as a whole, the energy system as a whole. Generate what you can, monitor what you produce as opposed to what you use, try and limit what you use. All those things are incredibly important to the Energy Sovereignty Project. The project as it stands, we've created a term for the connection that we're using, and we're calling it grid compliant. And it's not an off-grid situation, but it's also not a traditional solar hookup either. Currently, if you have solar on your house, no matter how much solar you produce, right, if the grid power goes down, all of your power goes down. Now, the practical reason for that is that, say you have a community that has an 80 or 90% participation in solar power generation, and the grid goes down. You say you have a transformer explode. Well, if it's a sunny day and the transformer has exploded, and they send people out to fix the transformer, and 80% of the houses are cranking, there's not going to be a way to shut that off, and therefore, because they're not separated, you're going to kill somebody who's trying to fix that transformer. So, when the power goes out, everybody goes out. And now the grid is separated, your power is out, everybody's power is out, and now you're not going to kill the guy who's trying to repair the transformer. That has to be maintained, obviously. And the way that that's maintained in a grid compliant situation is with a high-speed isolating switch. And so when the grid power goes down, the house isolates itself and runs totally off of its batteries. There's nothing to the grid. Nothing to the grid, nothing from the grid. Your house is completely separated. Now, when the house is on the grid, the interesting thing about how the connection is set up is that it's all it is a 20 kilowatt line. Basically a single 240 volt, 100 amp line on an 80 amp breaker to the house. That's it. That's it. And the only thing that that line does is it either charges your batteries or it supplies the grid with 20 kilowatts of power per house, per hookup. All right. And so if the grid, for whatever reason, needs power delivered, it could conceivably draw from your house, draw from your batteries. And then you would be paid for that power because you delivered that to the system as a whole. Well, the inverse is also true. If the load suddenly disappears, in the case of, Australia just had one where, something strange happened. A lot of folks either, it became overcast, the temperatures changed, whatever, and unexpectedly everybody turns off their air conditioners and whatever, and your load goes away. All right? Well, that also can create an incredible problem if you're trying to generate all of this power and there's no place for it to go but the lines. All right? And so in that instance, the batteries were able to turn on and immediately start to take that load. Well, the power company, the utility company, for that short period of time in Australia was paying people to charge their batteries. And so that's the kind of give and take that I see in a collective system, and the kind of thing that it would be very irresponsible of us not to do.
What would the grid wants to you have excess energy and the grid is going to pay you? Mm-hmm. What does that look like? Is that like a reduction in your bill or a?
That's a good question, and I think that's a question that's yet to be answered. But I can tell you what it doesn't look like. And so here's the weird thing. So people who have solar will notice on their bill that they were credited in the middle of the day in December, that they were credited on their power bill because they created X amount of power. Now, wherever your utility is, they will handle this, somewhat differently as far as, they refer to it usually as net metering, right? But they'll handle it, differently. But the result is the same. You sent power, according to your bill, you sent some amount of power to the power company in December. How does that work? All of that power, all of my power generation should have gone into my batteries. It didn't, but it should have. So it was calculated. Now, I didn't produce a lot of power in December. And because I didn't produce a lot of power in December, the net metering then means that I then get charged for that difference in between what I produced and what I used. All right? So the kicker is that they don't value the power that you send to them with the same dollar amount that they charge you to use it. So in the case of the Energy Sovereignty Project in winter, all of the power that you collect goes into your battery. And the only time that you draw from the grid is when you replenish your battery. And so you only have to buy that power once. You don't lose the value between the cost of what you would have generated it for as opposed to the cost of what they're going to pay you for that generation, or that you have to rebuy it. So that puts the negotiating power back where it belongs. As you as a sovereign homeowner, you then produce X amount of power. You then use that power, you consume that internally, and then only when you need power do you. And the same thing happens when you deliver it. Now, in any grid compliant situation, there is that master switch. Now currently, if you flip that master switch on the side of your house that's hooked up to your solar panels, you simply stop producing. The amount of power that flows through that second meter that calculates how much power your solar thing produces, that stops turning. In a grid compliant setup, that master switch is right at the mains, baby. And so when you throw that master switch, it doesn't isolate your solar panels from you and everyone else. It isolates the grid from you. And that isolation goes both ways. If they need it and you have it, they can't take it. And so that puts the sovereignty where it belongs. I paid for the solar. I paid for the batteries in my garage. I own that. Me. All right? I'm not beholden to the utility company for anything except the power that I use.
Cool. And so this would obviously require compliance from the utility companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but that's the other annoying thing too, right? So say you want to put solar on your house. The first person that you speak to when you make that decision in most states is a representative of the utility company who wants you to present them with a power bill to show you what your previous consumption was, as though that mattered. Right? You know, and so that's the real kind of important takeaway is that the utility company should not be on your doorstep with any kind of a demand or threat or telling you that they're not going to approve your. Who are the utility company? What the hell do they have to say about anything other than, is it built to code? Right? That's really it. Now I get that they're, in the case of some massive installation, then we'd be maybe having a different conversation, and yeah, then you do have to play nice with everybody, but the in a standard home solar situation, no. Now the grid is capable of looking at that as a whole. As more and more people bring solar on, their load goes down, and the amount of power that they require to produce in summer goes down, and then they just look at it as far as trending, just like they always have. As far as, do I need more power plants? Do I need less? Do I have to adjust my substations and all of that? But yeah, that's you brought up that's a very annoying aspect of the thing, where you're told how much power you can produce. That's just wrong. That's got to stop.